Adam Smith. What a generic name you're thinking, right? He was a Scottish philosopher who later was known as the father of economics. Well, because in 1776 he wrote a book with a very long name, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Yeah, that's a bit too much. But jokes aside, this book was a very big deal. It was one of the first attempts to explain how economics actually work. This book didn't have any new ideas. All it did was connect many ideas together in a clear, logical way. And Smith showed us how things like labor, money, prices, trade, and wealth are all linked to one another. But one topic he keeps coming back and explaining all of these topics is gold and silver. And what happens when their value is messed with? Back then, rulers reduced the amount of gold and silver in coins. Today, governments don't melt coins, they print money. Different method, same outcome. You will see how they're very similar. And that's why we say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And when you look at gold, silver, and money today, it feels like the rhyme is getting louder. Now, before we dive deeper into Adam Smith's ideas, let's quickly take a look at our own world right now. A lot of people think the recent jump in gold and silver prices has something to do with the US printing a lot of money very quickly over the last few years. And honestly, can you blame them? Just look at this chart of M2 money supply. Now, what exactly is M2 money supply? Well, it's basically a measure of how much money is like floating around the economy and that people can actually spend. And it includes things like cash, money in checking accounts, in saving accounts, and even short term deposits. In short, M2 is the total spendable money available in the system. Now you can see that after COVID, the number didn't just increase, it skyrocketed. And M2 normally grows around 5% a year, but in 2020 and 21, it suddenly jumped to 25%. As you can see, a 25% increase in 2020, and then another 12.2% increase in 2021, a decrease in 22, and another decrease in 23. Now, over the past 50 years, such a high increase has never been seen, then followed by another almost all time high for the last 20-30 years, and then a decrease, which also hasn't been seen in the last 50 years or about. And this uncertainty regarding the money supply by the US government or the Federal Reserve has caused people to move to gold and silver, Bitcoin, real estate, you name it, assets which are not directly controlled by them. And yeah, that's the ongoing theory in the mainstream media slash the YouTube economic community. To really understand Smith's ideas about money, value, and gold and silver, we need to start exactly where he starts, with the division of labor. Smith explained the concept of division of labor with a very simple example, and later on it became very famous. The example of a pin factory. Now, Smith pointed out that if a single person is trying to make pins on their own, doing all the steps on their own, drawing out the wire, cutting it, sharpening it, and whatever steps are involved in making of a pin, he noticed that a single person would make about 20 pins a day. Not bad, you see. But if the work was divided among 10 people, and everyone did one special task, what we now call specialization, he noticed that the 10 workers together would make 48,000 pins a single day. That means on average 48,000 divided by 10, 4,800 pins in a single day by a single worker, compared to 20 pins if you worked all alone. And this wonderful idea where work is divided among people so that production becomes more effective or efficient, whatever you want to say, this very idea is what Smith calls division of labor in simple language. Smith also points out that the division of labor has not been designed by anyone or created by anyone, and rather, with time, it has emerged naturally with trial and error. Well, I think I should just stop elaborating further and just quote him here. It makes more sense.
This division of labor, from which so many advantages are derived, is not originally the effect of any human wisdom, which foresees or intends the general opulence to which it gives occasion. It is the necessary, though very slow and gradual consequence of a certain propensity in human nature, a propensity which has no such extensive utility in view, the simple propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another. Whether this propensity is one of those original principles in human nature, of which no further account can be given, or whether, as seems more probable, it is the necessary consequence of our faculties of reason and speech, belongs not to our present subject to inquire.
Now, once people started specializing in a particular job, they obviously needed other people for their other things in life. And that's why they needed a way to trade with each other. And the earliest system was the simple barter. You give me something I need, and I give you something you need. But it has a lot of problems. Let's say you're a farmer and you wanted a pair of shoes. You find a shoemaker, but the shoemaker doesn't want your wheat today. Trade fails right there. Another problem is a lot of times it's just so hard to divide things. You can't really pay someone with half a cow, right? Or one third a coat, or a slice of a clay pot. And some goods spoil or break so easily, and you can't save them for later. And because of all of these issues, people slowly started to look for things everyone would accept. Things that were durable, easy to carry, and easy to divide. Now, over the course of time, different societies tried different items: shells, salt, leather, beads, cattle, and even pins. Now, these early forms of money worked better than pure barter, but they still weren't perfect. And over the course of time, people naturally gravitated towards materials that checked all of the boxes, that didn't spoil, that were easy to move, could be easily divided into smaller units, and everyone agreed they were valuable. And that's how gold and silver eventually became the go to forms of money, not because a king decided it, but the people figured out they solved the problems barter couldn't. And just like division of labor occurred naturally over the course of time, so did gold and silver as money. Now, once gold and silver became money, rulers discovered a very sneaky trick: keep the coin same, but reduce the real metal inside it. Adam Smith wrote about this in pretty strong words.
The avarice and injustice of princes and sovereign states, abusing the confidence of their subjects, have by degrees diminished the real quantity of metal contained in their coins. The public authority, which is always supposed to watch over the interests of the people, has never, in this case, deigned to concern itself with those interests, but has constantly and uniformly consulted its own.
In simple words, rulers melted old coins, mixed them with cheaper material, and made more coins than before. On the outside, nothing changed, but the coins were less valuable than they were before. But why would the king do that? Well, to pay off his debts, and he didn't have the money, so he just created more out of thin air. This move of creating money out of thin air not only affected the creditors, but it also affected other people using the currency, the common man. And Smith clearly explains this by saying the following.
By means of those operations, the princes and sovereign states were enabled in appearance to pay their debts and to fulfill their engagements with a smaller quantity of silver than would otherwise have been requisite.
Now, fast forward to today, governments don't dilute silver anymore. Instead, they simply create new money, not by melting coins, but by pressing a button. We call this money printing, but most of it is digital. But the effects are the very same: more money in the system without more goods and services to match it. Now, this causes inflation. How, you ask? Well, let's take a simple example. Imagine this: there are 10 apples in the market and $10 in the economy. Now, each apple should cost $1. Now, the government prints 20 new dollars, and suddenly there are $30, but still only 10 apples, right? So, people have more money, but the amount of goods and services are still the same. So, what happens then? Well, sellers raise the price. The $1 apple becomes 2 or even 3. That's inflation in very, very simple words. More money chasing the same amount of stuff. And this happened in the US after the COVID pandemic. The US increased its M2 money supply by almost 25% in 1 year. Prices rose everywhere. Smith's message was simple. Whenever rulers or governments create money too easily, the value of that money falls. And the people who feel it the most are always ordinary workers, savers, families, not the rulers, not the elites, not the banks, not the people who printed the money in the first place. When Adam Smith talks about how rulers devalued money, one of the clearest real life examples he gives is the story of the British pound. Originally, the pound wasn't just a name, it literally meant a full pound of silver. But over the centuries, rulers kept reducing the silver content quietly, slowly, and very profitably. Here's how the pound changed. In the early medieval England, a pound meant 349 grams of silver. By 1158, 323 grams. By 1351, 258 grams. And by 1717, only 111 grams. So many centuries, the pound kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And Smith highlights this directly by saying,
The English pound and penny now contain only about one-third of their original value. The Scots pound and penny, only about 1/36th, and the French pound and penny, just about 1/66th of what they were worth originally.
Adam Smith answers another important question: what is the real measure of value? And according to him, it's not gold and silver. If something keeps changing in value, it can't be used to measure the value of other things. And that's the problem with gold and silver. They look stable, but history shows that they can rise and fall just like anything else. Smith gives a very clear example. In the 1500s, huge gold and silver mines were discovered in South America. Tons of precious metal suddenly flooded into Europe. The supply of gold and silver exploded, and the value of them dropped. So, something that loses two-thirds of its value because of one event clearly can't be a perfect standard to measure everything else. And if gold and silver fluctuate in value, then what does stay constant? Smith says the one thing that doesn't change, like metal prices, is labor. The actual time, effort, and a skilled person puts into producing something. He puts it plainly. The real cost of anything isn't the money you pay, it's the work you put in to get that money. When Smith talks about labor as the real measure of value, he doesn't mean all labor is identical. He makes a subtle but important point. In other words, some jobs require more effort, some require more skill, some require years of training, and some may be more risky than the other. And this extra effort, training, or risk makes the labor more valuable. A master carpenter, a surgeon, a master coder, a designer, they aren't just exchanging time, they're exchanging expertise, which takes years and years to build. Now, some of you still might be wondering, but why does one job pay more than the other? And Smith answers this question beautifully in his book. But I think that answer is too long and deserves a video on its own. Adam Smith further explains that if we want to measure value, we can't use something like labor, which is so difficult to measure, or something like gold and silver, which keep on fluctuating. According to him, food is the best long term measure of value. Smith also points out that silver is stable year to year, while food prices are not that stable year to year. But over centuries, silver is not so stable, while food prices are very stable century to century. And this observation by Smith holds true till this very day. Smith further continues and explains how food is the best measure of labor even across countries. He gives a very good example to back this up. Basically, the same silver buys more labor in Canton and less labor in London. But if we compare the food prices to the wages of labor, they are very similar across all countries. This is PPP, purchasing power parity, explained in the 1700s. And we can see this pattern is still being followed. If we compare the prices of modern day Canton, which we now call Guangzhou, and compare them to the prices of London, we can clearly see this pattern repeating. Okay, so the obvious question now is, what should one actually do? Invest in gold, silver, real estate, stocks, crypto, and then just pray for the best? Well, here's my honest take. All of these are to some extent speculation. They can go up, they can go down. They can protect value for a while, but history shows something very important. Most assets don't go up forever. They usually peak and then they plateau for a very long time. Well, look at the Japanese stock market, real estate market, or the Chinese stock market, real estate market, and the Nasdaq after the dot com bubble. I think it took 15 years for it to recover. The gold and silver peaked in the 1980s, and then it took them 30, 40 years to recover. And I think there will be countless examples. So, to wrap this up, what we have really learned from this book written 250 years ago by Adam Smith, the guy we now call the father of economics, and basically the person who kicked off the whole subject, is that not much has changed, especially when it comes to money. Over and over again, we see the same pattern. Rulers and governments mess with the currency for their own benefit. Back then, it was by shrinking the weightage of silver in coins. Today, it's by just printing money digitally. And it almost always ends the same way, inflation. And then people do what they've always done, they move their money into gold, silver, real estate, stocks to protect what they've earned. And honestly, that makes total sense. And yeah, that's it. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it definitely rhymes. And a lot what we are seeing today has already happened before. But the practical part, what we can take away actually from this and what we can do, is that we have learned that markets don't move in straight lines, assets shoot up, they protect wealth, but they also can correct for a very, very long time. And as John Maynard Keynes famously said, markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay rational. That even if you're right, you might still have to wait a very long time before they actually correct and you get your result. And what happens between that? How do you survive that time? And Adam Smith said it, and I think you have heard it before as well, like everywhere, that you should work hard, create your skills, and this time it has been backed by the father of economics who wrote the first book, and he basically wanted to say that keep working hard and eventually you will get paid. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video.